Hi everyone, and welcome back to A Bar Above. Today we are on location. Well, not really on location. We're actually in our backyard, but it sounds fancy when we say we're on location, right? But as you can see, we're at the end of summer and our tomato harvest is out of control. So we're going to be experimenting with this and having some fun along the way. So stay tuned.
So a couple weeks ago, Chris came home from a seminar and he was all excited because he heard about a new way to clarify things.
I kind of geek out on the whole clarification thing. Anything nerdy and like cocktail oriented, I'm a big fan of.
You probably noticed that.
Yeah, exactly.
We've already tried clarifying lime juice. I think you've done it a couple different ways, haven't you?
Yeah, I think we've done like 2 or 3 videos on clarification now.
So I wasn't too surprised that when he found a new way to do it, he was all over it.
And this has been one of my dreams for like 6 years, is to kind of figure out this process specifically for tomatoes. So like
it's just for Bloody Marys, right?
Kind of, but like there's a way to making tomato water, and essentially what you're doing is separating out the color and leaving the juice of the tomato, and it's kind of clear looking. I've never got it perfect though. It's always kind of this weird, kind of off yellow. Kind
of a dirty color.
Yeah, so the presenter at the time actually mentioned cryofreezing as it pertains to tomatoes. And what you're left with is a crystal clear tomato water. Yeah, exactly.
So cryofreezing, I don't remember my Star Wars trivia, but that's what they did to Han Solo, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Cryofreezing, yeah.
They clarified Han Solo?
They did. They clarified him. Yeah, we're going to be using carbonite later, so just stay tuned for that.
Really expensive.
Hold on, who am I?
Okay, back up. So this cryofreezing thing is supposedly a way to turn a tomato into perfectly clear tomato water.
Right.
How does that work?
So basically the idea that the presenter told me is you are going to freeze tomatoes in the freezer, obviously.
I was going to freeze them in the backyard.
And what happens is it shrinks the cells and kind of compresses it, pushes out some of the water, and it freezes on the outside. And then what you do is you bring it out of the freezer and let it thaw out, so that way some of the water drips out, and you put it back in the freezer and just kind of repeat this process. And the idea is that you're not rupturing the cells inside of the tomato, so the only thing that comes out is water.
Okay,
tomato
so if I
flavored water.
understand this correctly, we're going to get this tomato and we're going to put it in the freezer.
Yes.
Then we're going to take it out of the freezer.
Yes.
And we're going to put it over like a bowl.
Fine strainer, essentially, yeah,
and
exactly.
And it's just going to, as it melts, stuff's going to drip out of it.
As it warms up and comes back to room temperature, water is going to fall out of it.
And then we're going to put it back in the freezer.
Freeze it again.
And then we're going to put it back here.
Yep.
And let it
do its thing.
Melt.
Exactly.
And what we're going to end up with is some amount of perfectly clear tomato stuff.
Let's hope so, because this has been like 5 years in the making. And
if this doesn't work, are you just going to like quit?
No, I think next year I'll try something new.
All right, well, it sounds like we've got some tomatoes to put in the freezer. I really hope my ice cream doesn't start tasting weird.
So me being kind of the nerdy, sciencey person as far as cocktails concerned, I was interested to run this experiment a couple different times. So the first time I ran it was with whole tomatoes, froze them and thawed them out. The second way was to quarter them, and the third final way was to just kind of chop them up really good and see what kind of came out of the juice. And I was really interested in finding out what the yield was going to be like and what the clarity of the juice was going to be like. And what I found was that the yield was definitely different. The finer that you chop the tomatoes, the bigger the yield is going to be. But there's not a lot of difference as far as the clarity of the resultant tomato water is. So it's kind of an interesting experiment, and it definitely answered my question. So we're back a couple days later, and we just want to give you an update on kind of how everything went and the final results.
Yeah, so right before this, you saw Chris give a quick overview of exactly what he did. And so now we're going to talk about what happened. So this is what it looks like when you Han Solo a tomato.
Yeah, minus the carbonite.
Minus the carbonite. We couldn't find it anywhere. It wasn't at Amazon. It wasn't at Walmart. No.
Yeah.
So obviously the very first thing you're going to notice is this is not red. I don't know how clearly you can see with the bar behind me, but this is very, very yellow. And I think, first of all, there's no question that's very different than tomato juice. Tomato juice is definitely totally opaque, very red in color. And this is, while I wouldn't call it transparent, and I probably wouldn't call it clear, it's absolutely not opaque like tomato juice would be.
Yeah, and you can definitely see through all the way through it to the bottom of the glass. And I've done this experiment, like I've said, a couple different years in a row. Every time we go through tomato season, I try my hand at clarifying and turning it completely clear.
It's true, I can attest to that.
But it has very similar results as to the traditional way of making tomato water, which is basically just pureeing the living hell out of it, wrapping it in cheesecloth, and putting it in a fine mesh strainer and letting it just slowly drip
Just waiting.
by its own weight. Right, exactly. So the results on the color are very consistent with that. But it is kind of an interesting way of doing making tomato water.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. So as far as the taste goes, well, certainly you're not going to get that sort of meaty tomato flavor, but you get you absolutely do get a tomato flavor. It's just much more delicate, and I would almost say almost a little bit floral.
Yeah, and you were telling me or something earlier when we were tasting it, and you were comparing it to like a tomato in the height of its season.
Yeah, when you get one of those, you know, there's some tomatoes that are really meaty, and then there's other tomatoes that are really juicy. Like this really reminded me of just a great big bite of a really juicy tomato, which makes a lot of sense because that's got a lot of tomato water. But it makes me think of almost like the last of your salad where the tomatoes got all the good stuff in the bottom of the bowl.
You grab a piece of bread and kind of sop it all up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not a bad thing. I mean that. It's really, I mean, I think there's a really, really great flavor there. But I think you do need to be careful because if you think about using this in cocktails, you certainly couldn't just replace tomato juice for this because it's such a delicate flavor.
Yeah, so, and that brings up another really good point is when you're working with this in cocktails, we actually have made a cocktail with this, you have
For
to...
science.
For science, exactly. There was no class like that in my high school, damn.
No?
No. I would have totally done so much better.
They did 16-year-olds making cocktails.
Fine, even in college. But the thing you have to be careful is it is such a delicate flavor. It doesn't have that robust quality that tomato juice does. So using it in a cocktail can get lost really quickly.
Definitely.
So what we've made is, I read a book a long time ago. I can't remember the name of it, but the author kind of described some of the bartending scenes out in New York probably about 10 years ago, and one of the cocktails was called the Ghost of Mary. And it was essentially an idea like this, and this is why I keep revisiting it every year. So this is my
like
rendition.
A ghost haunting him.
It's haunting me. It is my, what is it, Moby Dick? Yeah. My great white whale. So the great white martini.
We're going to need a bigger bar.
So yeah, every year I try this. So yeah, this is my rendition of the Ghost of Mary, and we'll have the recipe over on our website with all the technique, notes, and everything else about it. So I'll just talk about this real quick. It is essentially a really light aromatic cocktail, and it's kind of a take on the Bloody Mary, obviously. And so I made a Bloody Mary salt around the outside to kind of reinforce that flavor, and then a bunch of tomato water and a couple other components in the drink as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that looking at that drink and I think tasting the tomato water in terms of using it in cocktails that aren't traditionally tomato cocktails, I think there's a couple things to be wary of. I personally don't see this working with any spirit that has seen oak.
No,
I don't think that's going to work, in my personal opinion. I could see it working with most clear spirits as long as you don't have too much sweetness. I think that sweetness is a little bit of a strange flavor. We tried to make a cocktail that was sweet, and it was just confusing.
Right.
It was sweet on the beginning, and then as the sweetness tapered off, it turned into a savory cocktail, and it really made for kind of a confusing experience.
And then with the salt added into it, it turned out really kind of
It's a bit weird.
Yeah, very strange.
That's not this one. That was one that we didn't bother bringing on here.
Exactly. So, yeah, just like I said, you can't use the traditional methods of making like sours or anything like that. So you kind of have to go free form without a cocktail family. And it presents its own challenges, but it's definitely fun and interesting.
Absolutely. I think as long as you stay with more savory flavors and stay away from things that are sweet or barrel aged, I think you could work it out.
I think I can actually call this the Great White Carbonite Whale.
I like it.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We'll have some more videos in the future, but until next time, have a great shift and cheers.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Google+, or visit us at abarabove.com.